The whole West Loop area is a pretty unique area here in the city. About 10 years ago, I really started a transformation. It historically was known as more like a food storage, cold storage area. And then over time, it's kind of progressed now where it's kind of a big tech office space.
I would describe the Green Street building as massive. It's just a very, very large project. I mean, it takes up almost the entire block, and it's almost as tall as the block. So it's just a very, very large building. It's the largest building I've worked on. And at the same time, it's very aesthetically pleasing. So it's not just like a big, large modular element. They put a lot of effort into making this a high-end office space.
The big challenge is probably the Muse area, which is the 50-foot pathway, clear height to the underside of the structure above. Took a lot of time to. The middle of the building was easier to design. The base of it and the top of the building where most of the challenges came structurally. And that's commonplace, where it's more atypical framing for those floors, just based on the use and geometry.
It actually goes about 48 foot to the bottom of our structure. So essentially you can walk under our building and see the underside of our structure about 50 foot above you, which is pretty impressive because there are columns within this space that are also spanning this 48 feet, and they're supporting about 2,000 kips of the building weight. So to have that much load sitting on a steel column is massive for it to span almost 50 feet. So we designed these steel columns as composite with concrete, and we were able to take what would have been the size of a W14 by 730 PLF to a 14 by 283 PLF with the concrete enclosure. So it made a substantial difference with the steel tonnage. We were fortunate on our lot that we have extremely high soil bearing pressure allowables. We had about 40,000 PSF on our site. So even though we have these very large bays, we ended up only having about an 11-foot bell diameter, which can support about 3,500 kips.
The one thing that kind of made it a little more difficult in the foundations was the column spacings are pretty large here. We had 30-foot by 40-foot bays. So we did have some pretty large loads at the base of 2,000 to 3,000 kips. But we did have good soil down at about 75, 80 feet below grade. That was getting us about 40,000 pounds of square foot bearing pressure. But based on the column spacing, we're actually, for the footprint we only had about 60 to 70 caissons, which for this size of a building is pretty minimal. In our industry, a lot of what we use is CSI software and the RAM software. On this project, it was steel framed. We did a lot of the gravity design and the RAM structural system. We also did a quick analysis and design in E-tabs for all the concrete shear walls. And then in terms of kind of modeling software, did a lot of Revit, and that's what we kind of used to share with the other design team members for coordination. Every trade kind of has their own model, and you kind of swap it, you insert it, you kind of see what they have. You can turn off their layers. You can turn off one model if you want to look at how does this mechanical ductwork impact our structure. You can just look at kind of the mechanical systems and kind of see like, oh hey, they're trying to cut through a beam, or do we have to move a beam around or make it a little shallower to allow that to pass through.
So our main software was RAM structural system. So we built the entire building in RAM structural system and designed most of the steel in that, steel beams and the steel columns. And we also analyzed the shear walls in that initially. But with RAM, we were also able to use their ISM tool, which is their way of converting a RAM model into elements, which they can then input into Revit. So I love Excel. I'm an Excel guru. So every time I have a challenging calculation to prepare, I will go straight to Excel, because for me, it's just better to be able to have the ability to have different input values and see the output change very quickly. So we went through the process of analyzing the steel column load and shrinkage to determine how much the steel columns will actually move under the entire building weight. And then we compare that to how much the concrete core will move, to compare that together to see, well, if the concrete core isn't going to move very much and the steel columns will move substantially, we need to make those steel columns actually longer to compensate. But at the end of the day, it turned out that they were moving similarly enough that we didn't need to adjust the steel column lengths.
So early on in design, in the schematic design, we would kind of just take an idea of, well, here's the footprint of the building, here's the kind of column bays we have, and you just use kind of a target estimate to kind of get a steel tonnage that could be used to get a rough cost estimate. Having the contractor on board very early in this project, they were pricing at kind of all the design milestones. So at SD, it was more of a narrative with a kind of an estimate, and then as we got into DD, started developing our drawings, they were taking those drawings out and actually doing tonnage takeoffs by their subs. At the same time during design, the whole steel tariff issue was going on, and I know that the pricing all of a sudden just had like a qualification of an allowance that was basically saying anywhere from like $500 to $2,000 a ton premium could be applied depending on how everything kind of shook out. Good thing is kind of towards the end of it when they actually went out for full bid, the market had kind of, the volatility had kind of calmed down a little bit, and the number they had for the steel cost actually came in under what they had been budgeting all along. I would say just based on really the public space and kind of how they're giving back to the community with the Muse, as well as the amenity penthouse that can be used for town hall meetings and stuff like that. It's a project that's kind of giving back more to the community. I know in Chicago, a lot along the riverfront, they have a lot of these public parks that are kind of required if you want to do a development around the river. But over in the West Loop, they haven't really had that. So this is it's going to be a unique project for the West Loop community for sure.